August 23, 1942. Bombs fall from the smoke-darkened sky. The flames dance on the rubble of a city that, hours before, stood proud on the banks of the Volga. The city bears the name of the leader of the nation, who has chosen it as a social model. An industrial emporium that produces 25% of the Soviet Union's armored vehicles in its steelworks. But it's also the home of 600,000 people who live in a residential area with blocks of flats, large parks, schools, and theaters. This is all on fire now. By the time the Luftwaffe 600 Heinkel 111 and Junkers 88 have passed, 1,000 tons of bombs will have turned the city center into a hell of 1,000 degrees. No less than 5,000 people died that day, and there were still another 200 more days to resist. Join us in this new episode of Military History to relive a confrontation that many point out as the bloodiest in the history of mankind, the Battle of Stalingrad. Are you ready? Then, prepare to travel back in time. On April 5, 1942, Hitler outlines the objective of Operation Blue: to take the Soviet oil wells in the Caucasus, which were fundamental to the Reich. To accomplish this mission, he deploys 1 million German soldiers, with around 2,500 tanks and 600,000 allies from Italy, Hungary, and Romania. But in the middle of the campaign, the plan is altered. The 6th Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, must move aside to go to Stalingrad and occupy it, no matter the cost. So the question is, why was this city so important that it was decided to divide the German forces? While it is true that it had an important military industry and a railway line connecting the Black Sea with Moscow, several voices in the German High Command considered it of little strategic importance. So, what made Hitler obsess over its capture? A name and an idea. The city was named after the enemy, Stalin, who had made it the model of what the new society had to be. Towards July 19th, the Germans are approaching the city under Hitler's inexorable command. Let no stone remain unturned. Stalin responds and dispatches the infamous Order No. 227. Not a step back. The city is doomed. The evacuation of unnecessary civilians was only allowed 35 days later, when the city was finally reduced to smoke and ruins. By then, panzer units are advancing through the outskirts of Stalingrad, which was defended by only about 56,000 soldiers. The troops of the 6th Army, commanded by Paulus, initiate a hasty attack, encouraged by Hitler, who was beginning to forget his front in the Caucasus. The commander in charge of Stalingrad's defenses, Anton Lopatin, gives up the city. On September 12th, Marshal Zhukov dismisses him dishonorably and replaces him with the tenacious General Vasily Chukov, who is said to never even flinch when missiles fell. The new commander, who has less than 20,000 men and 60 tanks, reinforces the anti-air defenses, operated by female soldiers, and promotes the deployment of snipers. Among them was the famous Vasily Zaitsev, whose figure was popularized by the film Enemy at the Gates. With his rifle, he killed 242 Germans, more than any other sniper in the 62nd Russian Army. It is said that he was motivated by hatred. He had seen rapes and displays of dead adolescents and children hanging from trees. On the same day that Chukov took command, Paulus is at the Wolf's Lair with Hitler, who wants to know when the city will be taken. The German general knows that the panzers are not the ideal instrument to fight in the debris-strewn streets. The counterattacks from the Kotlubin region in late August and September on the north of the city thwarted the 6th Army's plan to quickly conquer the factory district with a sudden panzer onslaught. However, on September 14th, A gap opens that allows a 200-meter approach to the Chukov bunker. The Soviets lose 2,000 soldiers, they evacuate 3,500 wounded along the Volga, and the Germans take 5,000 prisoners. It's the most critical moment of the battle for the Soviet forces. In response, Chukov deploys the troops within a few meters of the enemy. He knows that the German artillery risks wounding their own men if it acts. Both are now on equal footing. The fight is done with rifles, grenades, bayonets, and knives. It takes place on every street, every factory, every house, basement, or staircase. The Germans baptize it the Rat War. One of those buildings is Pavlov's house. Before the war, it had been a 4-story apartment building just like any other. Now, on Paulus's maps, it was marked as a fortress. This way, it became a symbol of the stubborn resistance of the Red Army soldiers in Stalingrad. By October, the Wehrmacht controlled 90% of the city. However, they were still unable to outflank the Volga. In the meantime, Hitler's worst fear was about to become true. The winter was arriving. During the month of October and the first days of November, Stalin reinforced Chukov's army with just enough troops to sustain the fight for the ruins of Stalingrad, while he gathered fresh soldiers to carry out a counteroffensive to defeat the Germans. By then, the Soviet spies had discovered that the flanks of the German Sixth Army were devoid of consistent mechanical units, and were guarded only by Romanian and Italian soldiers, unable to protect the Germans within the city. Stalin agrees to divert 1,700,000 soldiers, and on November 9th, with the T-34 tanks at the forefront, they undertake Operation Uranus. With an enveloping advance, they managed to isolate 250,000 German soldiers who, by Hitler's decision, were left to their fate. During December, the German army launched a new offensive against the city, Operation Winter Storm, but the Red Guard stopped it and destroyed it 4 days after it began. That month, the German casualties, due to starvation and cold, exceeded 1,000, while they were progressively encircled. Dozens of Wehrmacht soldiers crowd the occupied basements. At 2 in the afternoon, night begins to fall, and the terrible cold is 20 degrees Celsius below zero. Surrounded by the enemy, their nerves are shattered. They cook the meat of dead horses, and many are infected with dysentery or typhus. Without supplies, replacements, or artillery shells, it was physically impossible to continue fighting. On February 2, 1943, Paulus officially surrendered. 91,000 men were captured at Stalingrad. Only 6,000 returned home, while the rest died in Soviet prisons. In total, almost 850,000 Axis soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. On the Soviet side, the number would amount to almost 1.5 million. Since 1961, the name of the city is Volgograd. However, every February 2nd, it recovers its old name to remind humanity of this key event that changed the fate of the most tragic war in its history. If you like the story of the Battle of Stalingrad, we invite you to answer the following question. Was the taking of Stalingrad and its symbolic importance worth enough to risk the position in the Caucasus? Leave us your comment below, and don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history. Thank you very much for joining us, and until the next video.